They put my purse in the trash, whispering, "Nothing valuable inside." That's what they said, with their backs turned to me, in the very kitchen I paid for with 40 years of work and 30 years of silence. I was sitting at the table, still in my cardigan, the one with the little snag on the sleeve, listening as my own daughter and her husband sorted my life into piles. Keep, donate, discard. And my purse, my leather purse, the one Derek bought me on our last vacation before the diagnosis, the one that still smelled faintly of mint lozenges and hand lotion, ended up in the trash bag with an empty cereal box and a used coffee filter. Nothing valuable inside. That's what they said. As if they had checked. As if value was something they could measure by weight or brand name or how well it fit into their new minimalist aesthetic. I didn't say anything. I watched them from behind the rim of my teacup, my hands still steady, though my knuckles have long since begun to betray me. I remember the way the trash bag rustled when they shoved it down, the way my daughter's voice dipped into that performative gentleness she saves for the elderly and the dying. "You won't need this anymore, Mom. We'll get you a new one, something lighter." I smiled. That small, dangerous kind of smile women like me perfect after years of being spoken over. And I nodded. Because nodding has always been safer than speaking. I am 81 years old. I live now in a modest second-floor apartment overlooking a parking lot and a dog park. I have one sturdy chair by the window, a kettle that takes too long to boil, and a bookshelf I filled myself. There is no one here to adjust the thermostat without asking. No one to correct my memory or remind me when to take my pills. I am alone, but not lonely. Not anymore. But this peace, this clean silence, it came at a cost. And that cost was the slow, surgical removal of my identity under the guise of love. It didn't happen all at once. Of course not. They are too smart for that. Too respectable. My daughter has a PhD in behavioral psychology. Her husband is a financial advisor who wears linen in winter and calls his mother Margot like she's a client. They believe in plans, in whiteboards, in managing people gently into submission. When I first moved in with them, it was framed as a blessing. For them, for me. You'll have company. We'll have help. It'll be so good for the kids to have you around. I should have known better. Goodness, I did know better. But I was tired. Derek had been gone 2 years by then. The house was too big, the stairs too steep, and I missed the sound of someone setting the kettle without asking. I didn't realize how fast the transition from guest to burden could be. It began with the mail. Let us sort it, Mom. It's mostly junk. We'll keep the important things, then the bank accounts. Joint access, just for convenience. Then the phone. No need to keep a landline, and this new one has bigger buttons. My name began to disappear from bills, then from invitations, then from memory. They started calling me Gran in front of others. Never my name. Never Margot. As if old age made me universally interchangeable, some benevolent extra in the movie of their curated life. At first, I resisted gently. A comment here, a hesitation there. But resistance was always met with a concerned look and a gentle hand on my arm. We're just trying to help. You've done so much. Let us take care of you now. And what does one say to that when the help is soft-voiced and smiling? When it comes wrapped in oat milk and ergonomic chairs, you say thank you. You smile. And you begin to wonder if maybe you really are the problem. The purse, though, that was the moment. Not because of what it was, but because of what was inside. They didn't know. They never bothered to check. Or maybe they thought I had forgotten. But I hadn't. I never forgot. Tucked into the inside pocket, beneath an old bus schedule and a mended handkerchief, was the original deed to the house. My house. The house I bought with Derek in 1976 when the roof leaked and the plumbing was suspect, and everyone said we were foolish to take on such a burden. I had never removed that deed from the purse, even when we moved 3 times. Even when we refinanced. Even after he died. It was never about sentiment. It was about memory. Proof. Because I knew in the quiet place women carry things no one else sees, that one day someone might try to erase me from my own story. So I kept it. And when I saw that purse hit the bottom of the trash bag, I realized it had begun. The erasure. Not loudly, not with cruelty, but with efficiency and plausible deniability. And that is when I began to plan. Not revenge, not confrontation, but clarity. Survival. Because when someone tells you there's nothing valuable inside, they're not just talking about your purse. They're talking about you. So I waited. I said nothing. I asked, later, if I could retrieve the purse. Just for the bus pass, I said. My daughter smiled apologetically. Oh, Mom, we already took it out. It was really falling apart. We'll get you a new one. But they hadn't taken it out. It was still there. In the garage. I found it at night under the recycling bin. I sat on the concrete floor and pulled it open with fingers that shook, not with age, but with rage. And there it was, still intact, slightly crushed, smelling of coffee grounds, but intact. I removed the deed. I folded it into a plastic folder I'd hidden behind my sewing machine. I placed it in a tote bag with a zipper. Not elegant, but unnoticed. And then I waited again. Because if life has taught me anything, it is that timing is everything. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and listened to my daughter read out loud from a list of assisted living centers she had found online. Just options, Mom. In case you ever need more support, I nodded. I sipped my tea, and I imagined the courtroom, the judge, the look on my daughter's face when she realized I had not, in fact, become invisible. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that pretends to be kind, all soft light through the blinds and the distant sound of a leaf blower humming like a lullaby. I had just finished folding the laundry, my own, from the small basket I kept separate from theirs, though we lived in the same house, and I was setting it in the bottom drawer of the guest room dresser. The drawer stuck slightly, the way it always had, and I had to bend down, one hand bracing my knee, the other pushing gently. That's when I noticed it. The file box. Gray plastic, tucked deep into the space beneath the hanging coats. At first, I assumed it was one of Derek's old boxes. I hadn't seen it before. But when I pulled it forward, I saw the label. House Docs, M&H. M&H. Margot and Howard. My daughter and her husband. I opened the lid slowly. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, color-coded tabs, utilities, insurance, tax, and then ownership. I don't know what I was looking for. I don't even know what I expected. But when I slid out the folder marked ownership, I felt it before I saw it. That electric tension, that split-second knowing that lives in the body long before the mind can catch up. The documents were clean, printed in the last 6 months. A new title application, a transfer of deed, signatures, mine among them. My name typed neatly beneath the words grantor, hers beneath grantee. Dated 6 weeks ago. Notarized. Witnessed. Filed. Except I hadn't signed anything. Not that. Not ever. I stood there, holding the document, as a slow, leaden heat rose in my chest. My eyes scanned it once more, slowly, as if rereading it might somehow make the words change, as if refusal could become erasure. But there it was, a full legal transfer of my property into my daughter's name. My signature in shaky script, curved just enough like mine to raise doubt, but not enough to be real. It was forged. I knew it as surely as I knew my own reflection. The notary's name was unfamiliar. The witnesses, too. All of it, neatly done, convincingly packaged. A fraud in perfect packaging. I stood still for what felt like minutes, file in hand, until the sound of the garage door rising startled me back into the present. I replaced the folder exactly where I found it, closed the box, pushed it back into the drawer, and shut the dresser. I sat on the bed with my folded laundry and waited for the blood to drain from my face. Later that day, I asked my daughter casually about a new mail forwarding form. "Just in case I decide to travel," I said. She didn't even blink. "We already took care of that," she said. "No need to worry about mail anymore. Everything important goes to us now. You can relax." The word tasted bitter. Relax. I did not confront her. I did not scream. I did not accuse. Because I knew something she didn't. The original deed was still with me, zipped in the tote under my bed, untouched, unscanned, undiscarded. What she had was a copy built on fraud. And I had proof. I kept that knowledge close, like a pearl under the tongue. That evening, I sat through dinner with a calmness that must have unsettled her. I commented on the salad dressing. I complimented the new chairs. I cleared the dishes. And all the while, I held the image of that forged signature in my mind, like a weapon being sharpened. The following morning, I woke early. I feigned a bad night's sleep, complained lightly of restlessness, said I wanted a walk, some fresh air. "Don't go too far," she said, handing me a granola bar as if I were a schoolchild. "Just a few blocks," I lied. I walked 6, past the coffee shop, past the old fire station, past the last place I had ever felt safe in this town. I reached the small building that housed the legal aid office just before it opened. The receptionist was kind but distracted, a woman with painted nails and tired eyes. I gave my name. I explained softly what I had found. She asked me to wait. I sat on a vinyl chair for nearly 2 hours until a paralegal, maybe 30, called my name. She led me to a small office, beige walls, a chipped table. I laid the copy of the deed before her. She looked at it. She looked at me. "Are you sure this isn't your signature?" she asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the original, handwritten, notarized in 1976. My signature then, full of loops and pride, the way I used to write before arthritis and disappointment, reshaped my hand. I placed the 2 documents side by side. She stared at them for a long time. Then she nodded. "I believe you," she said, and I exhaled for the first time in weeks. From that day forward, a quiet war began. A file was opened, my statement recorded. The office made copies, filed forms. They told me to say nothing at home, to act normal. I was good at that. I'd been doing it all my life. At dinner, I asked about the neighbors. I watched reality shows with them, laughed at the appropriate moments. I complimented the baby's new shoes. I washed my dishes, folded my sheets, bit my tongue. And all the while, I documented. Every moment of erasure, every quiet indignity. When they moved my medication into a locked cabinet for safety. When I was told to ask before using the laundry machine. When my name was left off the guest list for a dinner party in my own home. I wrote it all down in a spiral-bound notebook and kept it tucked behind the lining of my suitcase. They had no idea what was coming. The day they threw out my purse, I understood it fully. The extent. The finality. They were clearing me out. Making space. Reducing risk. I was no longer useful. Only a liability. A legal loophole they needed to close. That night, I did not sleep. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, remembering the mortgage meeting where I had first co-signed, the joy on their faces, their gratitude, their promises. How easily all that evaporated into entitlement. I was no longer their mother, just an obstacle to their image. The next morning, I received a call from the legal office. The young paralegal's voice was steady. "We're ready to proceed. You'll need to appear in court, quietly, no announcement." "Just you," I said, "yes." I said it calmly. Then I hung up the phone and sat in my room for a long time, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked older. Of course I did. But I also looked sharper, more real. At breakfast, I said nothing. They spoke around me, over me. They discussed renovations, travel plans, gluten-free options for the next gathering. I ate my toast in silence, buttered corner to corner. And I thought, they believe I am gone. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. They think they've emptied me out like an old room, like a purse with nothing valuable inside. But they are wrong. So wrong. They don't know what I've kept. They don't know what I've planned. They don't know that the judge is waiting. And she will see the deed. And she will see me. After that morning in the legal office, something inside me shifted. Not in a dramatic way, not like thunder or glass breaking, but slowly, like the way autumn light begins to lean differently through a window, soft at first, then undeniable. I returned home not with defiance, but with clarity, a quiet knowing that steadied my breath. They were still in their roles, my daughter and her husband, orchestrating the performance of familial care with increasing polish. And I played my part. The soft-spoken mother with too many cardigans and too few opinions, always grateful, always accommodating, always available. That was what they expected of me. That was what they had shaped their entire strategy around. My silence, my compliance, my fading. But the truth was, I had never disappeared. I had simply learned to step softly. And now I was watching everything, filing each moment like evidence, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. I had come to understand something vital. When people try to erase you, they often forget to look you in the eye. Over the following weeks, my world shrank inch by inch. It was not sudden, and that's what made it insidious. My name vanished first from conversation, replaced by generic titles. Gran will stay in her room? Mom doesn't need to worry about that. She's better when she's quiet. These phrases were delivered with smiles, with cups of tea, with soft pats on the hand. I was spoken of in the third person while standing in the same room, as if I were already a memory, a presence that could be narrated rather than engaged. And then came the physical containment. They began helping with everything. My laundry folded without asking, my meals prepared in advance and labeled in small containers, my medication sorted into color-coded boxes and placed on a shelf I could not reach without a step stool they had quietly removed. I was told not to worry. I was told they were just keeping things organized. But I knew. I knew what control looked like when dressed in kindness. I had lived through a marriage that taught me the difference between love and management. And this was not love. This was removal. They placed cameras in the living room for security. Just a small white device tucked into the corner, watching. Then another one in the hallway. And when I asked about them, gently, with a polite tilt of my head, my daughter laughed nervously. "Oh, Mom, it's not for you. It's for the nanny, for when we leave the baby with her. Just ignore it." But they blinked red when I walked past. They recorded when I paused in the doorway. They captured me, silently, like a ghost. I stopped lingering near the kitchen. I stopped using the front door. I began taking walks at odd hours, slipping out through the garage when no one was watching, tracing routes through the neighborhood that curved away from the main streets. And when they noticed, because of course they did, my daughter pulled me aside. "We're a little worried, Mom. You've been wandering a lot. Maybe we should talk to your doctor about adjusting your meds." That was the moment I felt the ground tilt slightly beneath me. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Calm, practiced, a line rehearsed. This wasn't concern. This was the beginning of a file being built. Notes of confusion, reports of forgetfulness, manufactured signs of decline. They were preparing a case, a legal one, to prove that I was no longer capable of managing my affairs, that I needed protection, that they, out of love and duty, would assume control. It was almost impressive, the elegance of the trap. They had learned from the best. Decades of social workers and lawyers and doctors who all knew how to translate convenience into compassion. They wanted the house. They wanted the story that went with it. The aging mother gently cared for, her affairs handled with grace, her end softened by the loving hands of her children. They wanted the moral high ground, and I was the only one who could disrupt it. I stopped arguing. That was my next move. I didn't contradict, didn't question, didn't even raise my voice when my calendar was wiped clean or when my phone mysteriously reset itself, losing all my contacts. I let them think they were winning. I let them believe I was drifting. At night, in the room they now called the guest room, I sat with the old photo albums they'd boxed up and planned to donate. I removed one photograph from each, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it into the lining of my suitcase. Not because I needed proof of who I'd been, but because I needed to remember what it looked like to be seen. There was one photo of Derek and me, standing in front of the first house, paint rollers in hand, my cheeks flushed from exertion and wine. There was one of my daughter as a girl, sleeping on my lap, clutching my scarf, and one of me alone, hair long and dark, sitting in a library, the corners of my mouth lifted slightly, as if smiling at something I refused to share. I looked alive in that one. I looked unafraid. They moved my things. That was the next step. The bookshelf in my room was replaced with a storage bench. The mirror with a painting. My chair was reupholstered without my consent. "We just thought you'd like something softer," she said, her tone wrapped in careful cheer. But it wasn't about softness. It was about removal, about changing the shape of my world until it no longer held me. They wanted me to feel grateful for their attention. They wanted me to shrink, to thank them for the space they allowed me to occupy. I didn't. I nodded, always nodded, and I waited. Because I knew the date of the court hearing. I knew the paralegal's name. I knew which judge had been assigned, and I knew above all that my silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. One night, I overheard them in the kitchen. They didn't know I was awake. My daughter was whispering, low and fast, the way she always did when afraid of being caught. We just need the paperwork signed. Then we can refinance and start the addition. It's not a big deal. She's not going to say no, her husband replied, tired and annoyed. What if she does? What if she suddenly decides to get difficult? A pause. Then we'll have her assessed. We already have the doctor's note. She's been confused, wandering. You said she thought Derek was still alive last week. A lie. I never said that. But in that moment, I realized how thorough they had been, how far they were willing to go. They weren't just trying to erase my name from the deed. They were trying to erase me. The next morning, I smiled as I passed them in the hallway. I complimented her blouse. I asked about the baby's rash. I made oatmeal with cinnamon, just the way she used to like it. And then, when no one was looking, I tucked the final documents into my tote, zipped it shut, and set it by the door. It was almost time. That week, the baby learned to clap. Everyone made a fuss. Videos were taken. Applause was practiced. I stood in the background, smiling, quiet. And I thought, you have no idea what I'm about to do. They thought they had buried me beneath their systems and their smiles. They thought their control was complete. They didn't know that I had already taken the first step toward reclaiming everything they'd tried to strip away. Not just the house, not just the papers, but the self. The woman who once bought property in her name with money she'd saved cutting coupons and teaching piano. The woman who stood in court with her father at 16 and translated legal English into fractured Spanish for her mother. The woman who carried everyone else for so long that she forgot what her own hands were for. I was remembering, and they would too. Soon, the morning of the hearing arrived without drama. No thunderstorm, no bad dreams, no symbolic signs from the universe. Just a gray sky. The kind that makes everything feel quieter, heavier, like the world itself is holding its breath. I dressed carefully, old habits, old instincts, a navy skirt, wool, mid-calf. The hem still hand-stitched from a time when I didn't trust tailors with sentimental things. A blouse with pearl buttons, the kind they don't make anymore. Sensible shoes, polished the night before, with a scrap of cloth I'd tucked in my drawer years ago and never thrown out. The tote bag was zipped, the documents placed flat against the bottom, wrapped in a manila folder. Everything was ready. I made myself a small breakfast. Tea, toast, a sliced apple. I ate slowly, deliberately, as though this were just any morning. They didn't notice. My daughter was feeding the baby pureed squash while scrolling on her phone. Her husband was watching a video on something called passive income, barely acknowledging my presence. I said I had a doctor's appointment, reminded her I might be gone a while. She nodded without looking up. Okay, Mom, don't forget your phone. I didn't bring it. I didn't need it. The courthouse was smaller than I remembered. Clean, modern, but unimposing. No marble, no drama. Just a place built for decisions. The paralegal met me at the front bench. She looked younger than she had the first time I saw her. Or maybe I was older now. She asked if I was ready. I nodded. She handed me a small folder with tabs. Originals, copies, a letter of statement, notarized. We walked in together. The room was mostly empty. The judge was a woman, mid-50s maybe, with sharp eyes and a plain watch. I liked her immediately. She did not look like someone who believed in accidents. My daughter and her husband hadn't been notified. They didn't know yet that the original deed was still legally valid, that the transfer had never been legitimate, that I had built a case without a word of it slipping through my teeth. This wasn't a trial. It was a hearing, a quiet assertion of facts. But it mattered. God, it mattered. I spoke clearly. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had rehearsed. At night, in the mirror, over tea, while brushing my hair, I told them what had happened. I showed the documents. I pointed out the inconsistencies, the forged signature, the notarization by someone I had never met. The judge listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Are you of sound mind to declare these claims under penalty of perjury?" I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was mine to answer. "Yes, Your Honor, more sound than I've been in years." That was it. The decision was filed, the fraudulent transfer nullified, my name restored on the title. The paralegal gave me a small nod. Not victory, not celebration, just respect. And then it was done. I walked out of that building lighter, not jubilant, not triumphant, just intact. It's hard to explain that feeling unless you've been slowly made to doubt your own presence. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about the house. It was about being seen in full daylight and allowed to stand. No more whispers. No more locked drawers. No more schedules made for me, around me, without me. I wasn't naive. I knew this would be a rupture. That when they found out, the performance of concern would become a performance of betrayal. They would accuse me of secrecy, of manipulation. They would call me ungrateful, hysterical. And yet, that didn't scare me anymore, because I wasn't walking back into that house as a question. I was walking in as a fact. I didn't return right away. Instead, I took a detour. There was a small diner on the corner of Main and Elk, the kind with cracked vinyl booths, and a waitress who called everyone Hun. I ordered soup and coffee. I didn't need either. I just needed the time. I sat by the window and watched people pass. Old men with newspapers. Teenagers with backpacks. A mother carrying a screaming toddler who looked so much like my daughter had at that age that I had to turn away for a second. I thought about all the women who'd never gotten to do what I just did, who were silenced into dependency, softened into disappearance. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just stirred my soup and let the heat return to my hands. Back at the house, nothing had changed. The same toys on the carpet, the same half-folded laundry, the same scent of formula and lavender disinfectant. I walked through the front door with the steadiness of someone who had been locked out long enough to learn how keys are made. My daughter looked up. "That was quick," she said, not even registering the shift in me. I smiled, the smallest smile. "In and out," I replied. She nodded. "Good." We need to talk later about that assisted living place we toured online. The one with the wellness pods. I think it could be a really good fit for you. I nodded again. Yes, I said. Let's talk. But not now. Not yet. Not before I'd unpacked my bag and placed the folder back in its hiding place. Not before I'd brewed another cup of tea and sat in the quiet with the taste of dignity still fresh on my tongue. Not before I'd made a small list in my notebook, the kind of list that isn't made of to-dos, but of truths. Number 1, they never expected me to notice. Number 2, they never expected me to fight. Number 3, they never expected me to win. And yet, I had done all 3. Quietly, thoroughly, unapologetically. I went to bed early that night, slept in my own sheets, dreamed of nothing and everything. And when morning came, I woke not as a woman waiting to be moved, but as a woman ready to move herself. They still didn't know, but they would. Soon. The news broke not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with silence that cracked like bone under weight. It began the morning my daughter received a letter in the mail, registered, crisp, the kind of envelope that carries legal language rather than sentiment. I was sitting at the table, buttering toast slowly, watching the baby knock a plastic spoon against the tray of her high chair like it was a drum. The moment my daughter read the return address, her fingers clenched the envelope in a way I hadn't seen since she was 12, and caught lying about a broken vase. Her husband came in with his travel mug, glanced at her face, and asked what was wrong, but she didn't answer right away. She just opened the envelope with slow, methodical care and unfolded the pages. I sipped my tea. I didn't look directly at her, but I didn't have to. I could feel the room shift the way animals feel earthquakes a second before they arrive. She read the letter once, twice. She handed it silently to her husband, and I watched his eyes move, his jaw tighten, and then loosen again as though he couldn't quite decide whether to panic or posture. No one spoke for several minutes. The baby dropped the spoon. I reached to pick it up, and in that moment, her voice cut the air like a wire pulled too tight. You went to court? I didn't answer. I stood, walked to the sink, rinsed the spoon, and returned it to the baby's hands. You went behind our backs? She asked, louder now, voice rising in that artificial pitch people use when they want to sound in control. You filed against us? Still I said nothing. Her husband stepped forward, the letter still in his hand. This isn't just about the house. This has legal implications. You should have come to us, and that's when I turned. That's when I looked at them both and said, clearly, without anger, without apology, you forged my name. You filed papers I never signed. You tried to disappear me from my own life. So no, I didn't come to you. I went to the law. The silence that followed was thick and shaking. My daughter opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed it again, her lips trembling. Her husband set the letter down on the table too carefully, as though it might catch fire. The baby squealed in delight and flung the spoon again, completely unaware that her parents had just lost control of the narrative they'd so carefully constructed. I walked to the hallway, picked up my tote, and returned to the table. I unzipped it and pulled out the manila folder, the original deed, the notarized statement, the timeline I had written in my own hand with dates, notes, and receipts. I set it in front of them, like a final course in a meal no one wanted to finish. This is not a discussion, I said, and that's when I saw it in their faces. Not just shock, not even betrayal, but fear. Not fear of me, but of what they had underestimated. They had bet everything on the image of the docile, dependent mother. They had bet wrong. That afternoon, I packed my things. Not all of them, just enough to leave with dignity. They watched me move through the house with stunned detachment, like people watching a building collapse and realizing too late that they were still inside. My daughter followed me down the hall at one point, her voice hushed now, almost childlike. "Where will you go?" she asked. I folded a blouse. "Somewhere I choose." She nodded slowly, tears welling but not falling, because she still hadn't decided whether she was the victim or the villain in this story. Her husband didn't say anything. He didn't help, didn't block me, didn't threaten or plead. He just stood near the door with his arms folded, jaw tight, mind probably already spinning through worst-case scenarios and damage control. I left that evening, not in a storm of anger, not with suitcases hurled into the night, but with a taxi waiting and my back straight. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. The motel I checked into was nothing special. Clean, anonymous, quiet. It smelled faintly of old upholstery and industrial soap. I slept that night without dreams, my body still carrying the tension of years I hadn't let myself name. The next morning, I called the paralegal and told her I'd moved out. She paused, asked if I was safe, if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. "Are you sure?" she asked. And I said, "I'm not sure of anything. But I'm not in their house anymore. That's enough for now." I spent the next few days looking for apartments, for rooms, for anything with a door I could lock and a window that faced the world. I found a small unit above a laundromat. The floors creaked, the water pressure was fickle, but it was mine. Mine. No one had ever handed me a key with that much meaning before. Word got out, of course. My sister called first. "What the hell is going on?" she asked. She'd spoken to my daughter, who'd sobbed into the phone about betrayal and shock, about how she'd been blindsided by my sudden paranoia. I told her the truth calmly, factually. She went quiet. "Jesus," she said. "You're serious?" I said yes. "You really think they would?" And I interrupted her. "I don't think. I know." After that, the calls came sporadically. Friends, cousins, even one of my daughter's friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, who said she always suspected something was off. But the one call that stopped me cold came from my grandson. Not the baby, of course. The older one, from my daughter's first marriage. He was 17 now. Hadn't visited in nearly a year. "Grandma," he said, voice unsure, careful, "Are you okay?" I almost cried then, not because of the question, but because of how carefully he asked it. Like maybe he knew what it meant to be erased. I told him yes. I told him I was more than okay. And then he said something that struck like lightning. "They said you just disappeared, that you were confused. But I didn't believe them. You always knew where you were." I thanked him. I didn't say much more. But that call, God, that call mattered. Meanwhile, my daughter and her husband launched their counterattack. It began with messages, long, breathless voicemails full of hurt and confusion. Then came the emails, measured and professional, full of clarifications and misunderstandings. They were building their side of the story. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to recover narrative ground. A week after I moved out, a story appeared in a small local publication. An anonymous tip, about an elderly woman with cognitive decline being manipulated by outsiders. No names were used, but I knew the shape of their words. I had heard them before, whispered across dinner tables and doctors' offices. I let it pass. I didn't respond. I didn't reach out. I simply lived. I bought groceries. I learned the bus routes. I made tea and drank it alone without commentary. But the second escalation came when a letter arrived from their lawyer. Not a lawsuit, just a request for discussion. They wanted a mediated conversation. They wanted a chance to clarify intentions and restore trust. I took the letter, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for hours. And then I wrote a reply. Not to them, to their lawyer. 2 sentences. There is nothing to mediate. The house is mine. The past belongs to us all, but my future does not. I mailed it the next morning with no return address. The next week, I saw them. In the grocery store. I had just turned the corner near the tea aisle when I saw her, my daughter, frozen, holding a box of rice crackers like it was a weapon. She didn't approach, neither did I. We stared at each other for a moment that felt like falling. Then she walked away. No words. No scenes. Just space. A few days later, my landlord told me someone had called, asking if I lived there. He hadn't given out information, but he warned me gently. Maybe keep things quiet. I thanked him. I knew who had called, or at least who had asked someone else to. That night, I double-checked the locks. I rearranged my closet. I pulled out the folder again, reread the judge's statement, the legal finality of it. It helped. Not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed to remember I had done something real. I had made something unerasable. Then came the final strike. A courier showed up at my door with a new envelope. Inside, photos of me from the past 3 weeks, on the bus, at the bank, outside the cafe. Surveillance, a list of financial transactions, a polite letter expressing continued concern about my well-being and evidence of potential elder vulnerability. The implication was clear. They were collecting proof to come at me again, this time through guardianship or conservatorship. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. This was not a family conflict. This was colonization, and they were planting flags wherever they could. So I called my lawyer. I handed over the letter, the photos, the list. She filed a cease and desist, and then, without fanfare, I changed my phone number. I alerted the building manager. I made copies of my legal documents and placed them with a friend, someone outside the blast radius of my family name. I wasn't hiding. I was fortifying. I knew now what they were capable of. I also knew what I was capable of. On the first clear morning of October, I stood on my small balcony with a cup of coffee and watched the sky lighten. The air smelled like wood smoke and new beginnings. Somewhere, they were still strategizing, still spinning the tale of the poor, confused matriarch, led astray by who knows what. But here, in this space I had claimed for myself, there were no whispers, no cameras, no decisions made without me. Just light and silence and my own breathing. They had tried to write me out of the story, but I had learned how to write myself back in. The final act didn't arrive with drama or noise, but with a brown paper envelope slid under my door on a Thursday afternoon when the light was long and the air smelled faintly of soap and dust. I had just made tea, was folding the second of 3 dish towels, when I heard the whisper of paper against linoleum. I knew the shape of it before I touched it. My name was written in careful print, unfamiliar, but steady. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal statement from a new lawyer representing my daughter and her husband. Not a threat this time. Not exactly. A petition for familial mediation. Another attempt to frame the theft of my autonomy as a misunderstanding, a family disagreement, something that could be talked over with chamomile and clipped voices in a room with neutral walls. But what sat beneath the legal tone was simple. They were afraid. Not for me, not for my safety or dignity, but for what they had lost control of. Me, my property, the narrative. That was when I knew it was time. I didn't need more proof, didn't need another letter or voicemail or trembling confrontation in the baking aisle of a grocery store. What I needed was to put it down, not forget it, not forgive it. Just lay it down in a place where it couldn't be used to pull me back. That night, I wrote a final letter, not to the lawyer, not to the court, not even to my daughter. I wrote to myself. 4 pages, single-spaced, in my own handwriting. I wrote everything, what happened, how it began, where it led. I didn't soften the truth or round off the cruelty. I wrote about the moment they tossed my purse in the trash, the way my name was spoken around me like it was fragile, the way I watched myself shrink into the shape they made for me. And then I wrote about the courthouse, the ruling, the way I walked out into the street and felt the ground hold me as if it had always been waiting. I wrote about the smell of motel sheets and the sound of a door locking behind me with no other hand on the knob. I wrote about silence and how it can be a wound, but also a room. When I was done, I folded the pages and slid them into a folder. I marked it clearly, in case I forget. I placed it under my bed, beside the folder of legal documents. Then I turned off the light and slept for 8 uninterrupted hours. The next morning, I dressed early, took the bus into the city, and walked into a local notary office with clean windows and too much air conditioning. I signed a letter stating clearly that I had no dependents, no guardianship requests pending, no legal obligations to respond to family inquiries. I had the letter notarized, made 4 copies, and mailed one to my lawyer, one to the county court, one to a legal archive service, and the last I kept in my kitchen drawer next to the scissors. When I left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. That evening, I returned home and sat on my balcony with a glass of wine. Not because I enjoy wine anymore, but because I liked the weight of the glass in my hand, the way it caught the light, solid and self-contained. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. I recognized my daughter's voice instantly. It was low, controlled, the kind of voice she used with clients or patients she was trying not to alienate. She asked me to call her back, said she was hoping we could find a peaceful way forward. She didn't mention the forged documents, or the surveillance, or the purse. Just peace. Like it could be summoned by tone alone. I didn't call back, not out of cruelty, but because I was no longer at the part of my life where I had to respond to everything that demanded me. I had moved out of that role. I wasn't the keeper of their guilt anymore. That week, I bought a new purse, not leather this time. Canvas, with a sturdy zipper and a wide strap. I placed inside it only what I needed: ID, keys, wallet, a photo of myself at 32 in a red sweater I had long since lost. The rest I left behind. I didn't need to carry the weight of their betrayal with me into grocery stores and sidewalks and waiting rooms. I had survived it, cataloged it, defended myself against it in court. That was enough. One night, I walked past the old house. Not because I missed it, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could pass by and not stop. The porch light was on. A car I didn't recognize was in the driveway. The blinds were closed. I stood across the street for exactly 40 seconds, then turned and kept walking. The air was cool, the sidewalk uneven. My back did not ache. My steps did not slow. The final confrontation didn't come from them, it came from within. One morning, I woke with the urge to do something symbolic, something no one else would see or understand, but that I would feel. I took the copy of the forged deed, the one they'd used in their attempt to erase me, and I burned it. Not dramatically. Not with anger. I did it in the sink, sheet by sheet, watching the edges curl into smoke. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I simply stood until the last fragment turned to ash. Then I wiped the sink, made tea, and wrote in my notebook. Closed. Completely. A few days later, my grandson texted me from a new number. A short message. Still think about you. Hope you're okay. Would like to visit, if that's all right. I waited a day, not out of hesitation, but out of ceremony. Then I responded, yes. You may come. Just you. He arrived that Saturday, taller than I remembered, quieter too. He brought a paperback novel and a bag of oranges. We sat at my small table and talked about everything except what had happened. It was perfect. When he left, he hugged me tight and said, "You look like you again." I smiled. I am. That night I opened my window, let the breeze in, and turned the page in my notebook. I wrote one final sentence before turning out the light. They tried to make me invisible, but I made myself undeniable. Some mornings now I wake before the sun, not from anxiety, not from age, just from a kind of settled rhythm that's returned to my body like an old song I once knew. I sit by the window, blanket over my lap, a warm mug in my hands, and I watch the world begin again. It always does, whether we're ready or not. In this quiet, nothing has to be proven. There are no files to prepare, no conversations to rehearse, no doors to check for locks twice. The light moves gently across the floor, and I think to myself, so this is what safety feels like. Not silence imposed, but silence chosen. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of sovereignty. I am not restored to something I was before. I am something new. Something shaped by fire, but not reduced to ash. They say healing comes slowly, and maybe that's true. But some parts come all at once, like the first moment you realize you no longer have to explain yourself to anyone. I have not heard from my daughter in many weeks. I imagine she's still telling the story her way, still collecting sympathy from people who only know how to respond to tears. Perhaps she's even convinced herself of it by now, that what they did was reasonable, or at least forgivable. I don't need to correct her. That part of the story isn't mine to fix. The part that is mine has already been written, in court transcripts, in notarized letters, in the quiet thud of a purse retrieved from the trash and placed back on a shoulder that refused to sag. The truth lives in what I did, not what they said. And I live with that truth every day, not like a wound, but like a well-earned scar. I trace it sometimes, not for pain, but for proof. The apartment is still small, still imperfect. The sink leaks a little, and the heater hums too loudly when it kicks on. But the view from my window includes a maple tree that turns deep red in October. And sometimes, if I leave the window open just a crack, I can hear the children at the schoolyard across the street, laughing during recess. I like those sounds. They remind me that the world is full of things I am not responsible for, and that's a relief. I volunteer twice a week now at the library, just shelving books mostly. No one there knows what happened. No one calls me Mom or Gran or asks if I've taken my pills. They just call me Margot. And sometimes, when I'm walking home, I say that name out loud to myself, just to hear it again in my own voice. I have no grand message, no triumphant ending to proclaim. Life after a storm is not a victory parade. It's laundry and groceries and getting used to your own company. It's learning how to set your own bedtime without guilt. It's making soup for one and not feeling sorry about it. It's finding a blouse in the back of your closet and wearing it not for anyone else, but because you remembered how it made you feel the first time. There are no medals for surviving the slow erasure of your personhood. Just the quiet, holy fact that you did. If another woman like me is reading this someday, if someone is sitting alone at her kitchen table, wondering if what she's feeling is real, if the way her daughter's voice tightens around her name means something, if the way she's spoken to like a child is something she should accept, I want to tell her, you are not imagining it. You are not ungrateful. You are not alone. The slow theft of dignity is still theft. And you are allowed to defend what remains of you. Not because someone gave you permission, but because you exist. That is all the permission you will ever need. I used to believe I was lucky, that I had a family, a roof, a place. I thought that was enough. I thought needing more made me selfish. But I understand now that being needed and being respected are not the same thing. And I want both. I have both. In my own way, in my own small corner of this city, I have built a life that no one else owns, that no one can sign away with a pen and a lie. So this is where it ends, not in rage, not in revenge, but in return. To myself. To the sound of my name said by me. For me. To mornings filled with light and nothing urgent. To a purse that carries only what I choose. And to the knowing, finally, that I am not what they tried to make me. I am what I saved.